Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the opportunity of being here today talking to you and presenting this work that was done as a bachelor thesis for the management engineering course at the Federal University of ABC in Brazil. And I would also like to thank the professor, Dr. Hugo Ibuzuki, who guided me and helped me during the preparation and execution of this work. The theme of the work is the innovation policy of the Brazilian automotive industry, a comparison with Germany. Brazilian people are fascinated by cars, and this is not a secret, but the automotive industry is also very important for Brazilian economy. And it corresponds to 22% of the industrial GDP and 4% of total GDP. But the production in Brazil comes from small adjustments of the products created in the automaker's headquarters. So the automakers prepare, they develop the project, the concept, and the design of these products abroad in their headquarters, especially in USA, in Europe, or Asia, and they bring it to Brazil. So what happens? There is not an evolution of the R&D and of the innovation here in the country. Once the country just bring the products here and assemble it here in the Brazilian industry, the Brazilian lines. Germany, however, is a worldwide leader in the sector, and factors as the public policies and innovation, as I mentioned, were responsible for the rise of the country. Brazil also had some public policies in the past decades, but here we will mention just the two most recent ones, the Inovar Alto and the Rota 2030. The Inovar Alto started in 2013 and defined some specific goals such as increase the investments in R&D and engineering spending. The program granted a series of benefits to the industry, such as tax reductions for the companies that achieve specific targets. The plan also defined three actuation areas: goals in R&D, labeling vehicles according to fuel efficiency, and goals in engineering. The last register of the Inovar Auto had it was in October 2017 and had 33 licensed companies, being 25 automakers. And the number of companies that chose the R&D was on average 50%, once each company had to choose two out of the three proposed options to work. The Inovar Auto was closed at the end of 2017 with some successful points such as the accomplishment of fuel efficiency of lightweight vehicles, but other points didn't have the same outcome. For example, the concentration of the production chain. The, Back in 2017, the European Union and also Japan decided to open a pledge against Brazil, claiming the fact that the Nova Auto was a protectionist program and according wasn't acting according to World Trade Organization guidelines. This indictment, the decrease of vehicles produced in the country due to the economic crisis, and the pressure of the companies for non-protectionist measures made Brazil abandon the program and prepare the Rota 2030 in a way to avoid any kind of similar problems in the future. The Rota 2030 aims to regulate the automotive market and determine a special tax regime for imported parts that are not produced in the country. The Rota 2030 is the successor of the Inovar Auto, and all the money obtained with the Rota 2030 will be shared with five different institutions: Senai, BNDES, FINEP, Embrapa, and Fundep. The to and These projects will have as main focus to develop a network in the automotive sector, promoting projects at all levels of technology maturity, strengthening the research, development, and innovation. The chance to obtain important technological advances for the Brazilian automotive industry. The Rota 2030 has two lines, the line 4 and the line 5, that will be approached in this work. Both lines count on the participation of companies with representative entities and institutions of science and technology. The line 4 aims to develop the tooling of Brazilian companies, while the line 5 has as goals the electrification of the vehicle powertrain for high energy efficiency. Here we have a table comparing both programs, so we can highlight some of the differences. Some of the topics is still the same, but some also changed. For example, the focus of the Inovar Auto was only the automakers, but Rota 2030 considers also the auto parts. The length of the Inovar Auto was of only 5 years, Rota 2030 of 15 years. The requirements, for example, the Rota 2030 has the tagging as 100% mandatory, this is not optional anymore. Benefits, the Rota 2030 will also have the reduction for hybrid and electric vehicles, the reduction of EPE. EPE is a federal tax that applies to all national and foreign products that have been industrialized. And also here in strategic programs, two topics were added, are now approached also by the Rota 2030, vehicle safety and autonomy, and also the advanced manufacturing. Meanwhile, in Germany, in August 2006, and led by BMBF, the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, it was created the high-tech strategy, which aimed to define the guidelines of the innovation industry in the following years in the country. The program involved all the ministries and several scientific institutions, a structural program that aimed to promote innovation. This is something that needs to be improved here in Brazil once the public policies here consider not all the agents in general consider only the automakers, sometimes the auto parts, but not other agents, for example, universities or research centers. The third and most recent phase of high-tech strategy began in 2014. And in this phase, the automotive sector received the investments planned, but other sectors, the high-tech strategy is not a program only for the automotive industry, but for the whole German industry. And some other sectors important to the or linked straight related to the automotive sector also received investments. For example, the microelectronics sector, which takes an important space in electromobility, an area that will develop a lot in the next few years. It's important also to highlight that the investment in R&D by public and private spheres increased from 2% GDP in 2006 to 3% GDP in 2017, what puts Germany at the first position in Europe when we consider absolute numbers and one of the few countries of the continent that achieved the 3% of the GDP before 2020. The R&D investments in the country are breaking records with a total of $113 billion invested in the country. As I said, not only for automotive industry, but the sector that received more incentives in the past years was exactly the automotive industry. The methodology. First, the current innovative policies were presented. So, as I have already presented the Inovar Auto and Rota 2030 in Brazil and the high-tech strategy in Germany. Then some indicators of both countries were compared, and we analyzed the information in order to understand how the policies affect the sector and the performance of both countries in the worldwide scenario. The first comparison we can make in order to analyze the impact of the recent public policies in Brazil and in Germany is the comparison of the R&D spending in Brazilian automotive sector and in the German automotive sector. This graph represents the Brazilian part. So in 2014, the Brazilian automotive sector got $1.2 billion in investments. However, the value of, of investments was reduced and decreased, reaching the value of $0.8 billion in 2017. If the external R&D here in red in the graph had a small growth within the period, the internal R&D, on the other hand, was reduced by almost $350 million. In Germany, however, in 2014, $35.3 billion were invested in the automotive industry, a number that puts the sector as the biggest receiver of investments in R&D in that year. And the sector kept its lead position in 2017, and both internal R&D and external R&D had an increasement within this period, totalizing for $45.2 billion of investments in the area. If we compare the proportion, if we can try to make this comparison, in 2014, Germany had more than 30 times the total of money invested in the Brazilian automotive sector, and in 2017 it was more than 40 times. So if we can say this an impressive difference. We can also compare the source of funding for enterprise R&D in the automotive sector. If we give a look at the blue bar here that corresponds to the business enterprise, we'll see that it corresponds to the most of the investments, and with almost more than 90% in all the scenarios, Brazil or Germany in 2011, 2017. But we need to take care when we analyze the red bar, the government investments that is corresponded by red here, because the money invested by the government is not invested directly into new technologies or projects. Instead, it's applied to give incentives to companies and markets. For example, the government creates a public policy that gives incentives to companies, and these companies will will spend with their R&D with new projects, new investments. So the incentive given by the government is not straight into the new project, but in order to create a good structure for the companies, for all the involved agents. The rest of the world also had good participation, especially in Germany. And here we also have other Brazilian companies, which corresponds to public or private companies of this sector in Brazil. Also, the enterprise R&D spending on total automotive sector revenue, we can see that in Brazil in 2011, 2.55% of the total revenue was invested in R&D, but this number was decreased to 2017 to 2.35%. In Germany, however, there was a growth in the same period from 4.35% to 5.59%. It happens because in a scenario of economic crisis, as we had in Brazil in the past years, the first thing or one of the first fields that the companies will try to reduce their spendings is exactly the R&D. They prefer to spend with other things as production, etc. So R&D has a decrease, or at least had a decrease in Brazil in the past years. We are talking about investments, about spendings in the automotive industry, but what is the main destination, or what are the main destinations for all the money that is spent in this area? The first one we can highlight is the hybrid and electric vehicles. And in this scenario, Germany needs to adapt itself to not lose the lead position they have in the sector to companies and markets that already work with electrification. It's the case of Tesla in the United States of America and also NIO in China. In Brazil, the development and the use of hybrid and electric cars are still in their beginning, but it's already possible to highlight two main investments. The first one of $8.3 million made by the holding EDP Brazil, and the second one made by the Brazilian Electricity Regulatory Agency with a total amount of $110 million that will be invested within 3 years. At the same time, the Line 5 of the Rota 2030 provides also incentives to projects in the area of electrification, which totalize $0.9 million in investments. It's possible also to say that the public policies and incentives made by the German government show that the country aims to make better use of the segments. So if the market share of these vehicles in both countries is still small when compared to conventional fuel and gas ones, the European country is already preparing itself for big growth in sales within a few years. Another area that receives several incentives of the automotive industry is the area of autonomous vehicles. Here we have a table that shows a KPMG survey of 2019 that considers the preparedness for autonomous vehicles. Brazil is in the last position out of 25 analyzed countries. Germany, however, is in the eighth position, two positions less than the sixth place in 2018, but is still in a good position. The main difference between both countries is the fact that Germany has consolidated a solid ethics regulation for automated and connected driving. When we consider all the four topics that were studied, that were approached by this KPMG study, they are the policy and legislation, technology and innovation, infrastructure, and customer acceptance. Brazil is in the last position in three out of four. So only in customer acceptance, Brazil is not in the last position, being also not in a good position in the 22nd place. But the fact is that a solid X regulation is a basis for all the topics studied. So if you don't have proper legislation, if you don't have a solid policy, it's impossible to have and to improve the other areas, for example, technology and innovation, infrastructure, and even the customer acceptance. So Germany is a step ahead in this scenario. There are some projects in this field already being developed in Brazil, especially by universities, but Germany is just a little bit ahead. The Industry 4.0 is another area that receives several investments of the automotive industry. The concept of Industry 4.0 was first introduced in the Hanover Fair in 2011, exactly as part of the previous mentioned high-tech strategy program. In Brazil, 68% of the companies are not familiarized with the concept of Industry 4.0, but in Germany, 54% of the automotive companies are already working on individual operational projects using the Industry 4.0. So here it's possible to see the difference, to see how the German companies are already more aware than the Brazilian ones when the subject is Industry 4.0. This Industry 4.0 brings some benefits, for example, the reduction of production costs, reduction of logistics and quality management costs, more efficient use of natural resources, and others. When we analyze the innovation and the R&D in German and Brazilian automotive industries, the main difference is the fact that the German public policies, they consider different agents. Here in Brazil, the recent public policies considered just the automakers, sometimes also the auto parts, but didn't have a project, didn't have an approach to universities or research centers, for example. German initiatives, on the other hand, for example, the high-tech strategy, involve different areas of society. The new Brazilian policies need to improve the communication between parties. So, for example, the idea is to create a good structure for them. Of course, the development, the change of Brazilians' position will not happen overnight. But first of all, Brazil needs to define what's the position that the country wants to achieve. Does Brazil want to keep having the same position, just assembling parts, or does Brazil also want to have its own automakers, wants to add value to its own industry? That's something that needs to be considered if Brazil wants to move to a different shelf in the worldwide scenario. Some studied limitations and possible future investigations. The first one is the fact that the Rota 2030 is in its initial phase, therefore it's not possible to measure its legacy for the country. Another point is that few German data sources are separated by sector. In general, the German data is always consolidated in groups. So, for example, the industrial group, the industrial sector, but not especially the automotive sector, not exactly the automotive sector. And also the fact that it's possible to analyze the impact of the decrease in investments in university and scientific research by the Brazilian government. Due to the economic crisis of the past years, Brazil is now decreasing, it's reducing the investments in universities and research centers. So how is it going to affect the Brazilian innovative industry in the automotive sector? To finish this presentation, here we have the references of the work here as well. So that's it. Thanks a lot for the time and the opportunity. Bye bye.